Welcome back. In today's video, we're going to talk about GTO Step 1, conducting a needs and resource assessment. So in GTO Step 1, we are all about getting first-hand knowledge of the problem we're trying to solve. Oftentimes when a community or district is implementing a new program, they start with the problem and then they jump to a program to fix the problem without really getting an intimate and detailed knowledge of what the problem is and why the problem exists. So this is the focus of GTO Step 1. There are 4 buckets that we're trying to check off, 4 big picture questions we're trying to answer when we do GTO Step 1, and that is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? What are the causes of the problem? What's the underlying issues or the risk and protective factors that are driving the problem home? What other resources are available to solve it? And what does the problem need in order to fix it? So how can you address those drivers, those determinants, or those risk and protective factors related to the problem? So GTO Step 1 is really about going out there and collecting data and understanding from the people on the ground what is the problem you're trying to solve. Many times when we work with communities or districts or different organizations, people have a general sense of what they want to solve. So for example, a couple years ago, we worked with a governmental organization, the Department of Behavioral Health, in a large city in the United States. And they wanted to, this organization, it was a governmental organization, and they provided $1 billion worth of funding to services that, they invested in to do evidence-based practices to improve mental health. And they didn't know if that funding was worth it. They didn't know if all of this $1 billion worth of spending was getting to any outcomes. They didn't see the results of what they were doing. They knew that services were being purchased. They saw how many services were out there, but they didn't know if it was successful. And so they contracted with us to help them do this. And the first step we had them do was GTO Step 1. So they approached us saying, hey, listen, we have this vision, we have this problem, which is we want to know if services are effective. We fear that services are not effective and we're spending $1 billion each year. How can we ensure that we're getting success? And so the first thing they did was getting a firsthand view of the knowledge. They didn't just say, okay, so let's jump into GTO and fix the problem. They took about a month or 2 to collect data, to look at data that they've already had available to them, to do a full comprehensive scope of all of the services that were available and to really understand what problem they were trying to fix. And from this, they decided to target a very specific area of behavioral health with very specific goals and very specific desired outcomes. And if they hadn't gone through this process, if they hadn't taken the time, the month or 2, to do a really comprehensive evaluation of the need, we might have ended up in a different place. And so going real deep, and we're going to talk in the next few slides how to go real deep, but going real deep with understanding the problem really helps in the future steps of GTO. So GTO Step 1 is a systematic method for detecting community conditions that underlie the need for a program, and for identifying factors that could contribute to its success. So this is a need. What is the need in the population you're serving? Not what services need to be available. So that's a difference that's a little nuanced but important to think about. When we're talking about the needs assessment here, we're talking about the population you want to change. So in the Thai context, this would be what we know that they are elders with dementia and their quality of life may be suffering. What are the underlying needs they have? What are the drivers of their mental decline? What are the drivers getting in the way of them being able to live a high quality of life, even if they have dementia? So what are the needs that underlie a program? This is different from asking the question of, are there other services available to help this need? We're focused here on the problem, and the problem that we're trying to fix is the quality of life amongst elders. So it's all about the people and the people you're serving. This is a service-oriented question. What are the needs of the people you're trying to serve? There are two parts of GTO. There are the needs and the resource of GTO step 1, I'm sorry. There are the needs and the resource assessment. Myself, I'm just going to put it out there that I often use the shortcut and just say GTO step 1 is about needs. What I mean to say when I say that is GTO step 1 is about needs and resources. So I take a little shortcut, so I apologize if that was confusing, and that's what this slide is about, to make sure I emphasize that there are two parts here. The needs assessment arm of GTO step 1 is about asking 3 questions. What are the risk and protective factors? So these are risk factors, are things that these are factors in all ecological systems that worsen the problem. So in the case of elders, you may say, well, at the individual level, things like elders' age may increase mental decline, physical activity or lack thereof may increase mental decline, diet, other medications they may be on, the way they, self-efficacy and the way they think about, the way they have a positive mental attitude, things like that. Then at the family level, family support or lack thereof may worsen mental decline. You could think about friends and communities and social networks and other stimulating activities that are accessible within communities, high quality medical care, things like that at the community level. So each of the ecological levels, and then of course there's the macro level, what risks, what policies exist that get in the way of elders' quality of life. And then protective factors are things that mitigate against this risk or protect people from the risks that exist. So having a really supportive family or having policies and procedures and services available to help folks, having real strong sense of cohesion and social support could mitigate against some of these risks. So what we want to do when we're doing a needs assessment is go out there and figure out what are the things that are increasing the problem and what are the things that are protecting people from the problem. But that alone is not enough, because eventually we're going to want to intervene on one of these. So as we go out there and measure these risk and protective factors to really understand what's underlying our problem, our need, we also want to know, are these things that can be changed through an intervention? So if you are working within a small sub-district area and there's something that needs to be changed at a policy level, but you don't have policy level folks involved, you might not be able to change that risk, even if the risk is meaningful. On the other hand, if you're working with, say, Dr. Camacho, who does have some influence at the policy level, now that policy level risk may be something that you could intervene with. And so it's important to think about, is this something that can be changed? Actually, I skipped ahead a little bit to the second question, which factors can you feasibly change? So first, is this something that can be changeable? And then do you have the right people on your team to change it? So there are some things that maybe you can't change. Maybe you cannot change, maybe a particular patient is on a type of medication that they need to sustain life and you can't change that, but it contributes to mental decline. Well, that's not something you can intervene with because they need that to be alive. And so choose another factor that you can intervene with that could mitigate the risk. So I got a little twisted with my language, so I'm just going to repeat these so that I'm making sure I'm clear. The 3 areas to assess are identifying risk and protective factors. From those risk and protective factors, the things that worsen the problem and the things that protect against the problem, choose those or understand those that can feasibly be changed. These are things that you can change. They're changeable factors. From those, figure out which ones you can feasibly change, that the people within your team, this is something that we can do because we have the power and authority to do it. So those are the 3 areas to consider as you're doing your needs assessment. Then we're going to move on to our resource assessment. The resource assessment takes a slightly different approach. So now we know the risk and protective factors that are out there. We know which ones can be changed and which we can feasibly change because we have the power and authority to do so. Now we want to say, well, what else exists in the community that could target these? Because if you have a risk and protective factor that is really salient and really important and able to be changed, and you could change it too, but there are 5 other services out there doing the same thing, well, then maybe we should put our eggs in a different basket. Maybe we should move to a different program, because we don't need to replicate what other people are already doing, especially if they're doing it effectively. And so the resource assessment is getting to know the context. And specifically what we're going to look for here are the communities or district or sub-districts goals, their vision, their identity. Is this problem or this driver or this risk and protective factor something they align with and they stand behind? Is it part of their identity? Are they ready to implement and sustain a successful program? So it's just really getting to know the context within which you're intervening with. Then you're going to look for other groups that are out there that may overlap with you. So just because somebody else is targeting the same problem doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. However, when that happens, it's good to know, because you could leverage them, you could work together, you could build what we call interorganizational relationships, because now you might be able to find other people who are willing and able to help. You could work together, you could leverage funding, contacts, workforces, and effort to really synergize and get to outcomes in a more sustainable way. So both the needs assessment and the resource assessment are important components to this first step. So what to do? So now we're going to talk about how to actually do a needs assessment. So the first part is developing a team. This team is critical to your success. So you want diverse experiences. So earlier in this video, I said the purpose of the needs and resource assessment is to get a true and intimate understanding of the problem that you're solving. If you alone are out there trying to understand this, well, then you're only getting one perspective. If you put a diverse team together, however, now you have a diverse group of different perspectives and different ways of thinking and looking and conceptualizing the problem. And so as you put a team together, the rule of thumb, albeit I don't know how helpful this is, but the rule of thumb is to have a team that is big enough to capture diverse experiences, diverse perspectives, and different areas of expertise, but small enough to manage, because too big becomes unmanageable. So for the Thai context, you might want to have practitioners, you might want to have researchers, you might want to have family members or people within the community, maybe other folks who have experience working with Thai elders with dementia out there, so that they could talk about the problem from their perspective in the real world. And so put this team together and ensure that you have some people who are capable and have the capacity of looking at data, collecting data, analyzing data, things like that. And that is going to be your core team for this needs assessment. So convene them. And what does this team do? That's the next thing, right? We always talk about getting a team together, and then it's like, well, what do we do? We got together, what do we do? So the first thing you're going to do in this needs assessment is what we call a data catalog. If you are like most people watching this video, you're thinking at this point in time, I don't want to say most people, many people I say we talk about needs assessments too. You may be thinking, wow, this feels like a lot of work. I have to collect all of this data before we collect data for our project? And the answer is a qualified yes, because what we know is there's already a lot of data out there. We don't need to reinvent the wheel all the time. And so the first step that your needs assessment team is going to do is do a data catalog. It's figuring out what data we want to know about our problem. What do we want to know about our problem? And then is there data already out there that can answer that for us? So things like prevalence rates, health conditions, mental status, this might be data that's already out there in some archival data sets that you can access. There may be other data that you don't know. So drivers or risk and protective factors for particular communities or sub-districts. You might have to go out and talk to people, maybe do some focus groups, maybe do some surveys, maybe just do some interviews with key informants to get to know what the conditions are for the particular target population that you're working with. So this is new data that you may need to collect. So what we want to do when we go out there to collect new data is first identify what we need to know. So figure out what are the risk and protective factors out there, what's driving a low quality of life or mental decline amongst elders with dementia. Then we're going to collect data. This may be surveys, this may be focus groups, this may be interviews, this may be just going and looking at existing data that's out there. You're going to analyze it using your team, and then you're going to interpret it. So once you get all this data back, you have to say, well, we can't do all of this, so what are the areas that we want to prioritize? And remember, the areas we're going to prioritize are those that are changeable and that we can feasibly change. That is the needs assessment. The second part is the resource assessment, where we're going out to simply see what other resources are available to support you in solving those priority areas. So once you've prioritized those areas, you could say, okay, who else is doing this around us? And creating a catalog or an inventory of all the other resources that are targeting some area of that. Before I go on to this issue of if we already have a program, I would like to show you an example of the tools that we put together to help you do this needs and resource assessment. It'll just take me one moment to find where I put them. Here they are. All right, so this is attached. If you click the button below this video, you will see a link that says download tools or click to get tools or something of the sort. And you'll see that this is the data collection, the data catalog tool. And how you use this tool is I encourage people to print it out, because sometimes working with paper is nice, and give it to everyone on your team. And the first thing you want to think about are what are the major risk and problem areas, the risk and protective factors. What do we want to know basically about the problem? There's no right or wrong way to fill out these rows in this first column. It's really put your team together and brainstorm when we think about the quality of life of elders with dementia, what do we want to know? What should we collect data on? What sorts of risk and protective factors do we want to know? What are the things that may underlie dementia and mental decline? Then, after you've identified all the areas that you want to know something about, you think about how can we collect data? Does this data exist? If so, you could put an E in this column or write existing data, or you could indicate that you have to collect new data. And then you give if you're collecting new data, you give a person, you put a person in charge of doing that, so it's not a diffusion of responsibility, and the date you want them to complete it. And so what this does is what this tool does is creates a plan for understanding what you want to identify, how you're going to collect that data, whether it's new or existing, and who's responsible for doing it. So you put it all together, and then that person knows that they have to go out and collect that data. So this is a really nice organizational tool to help you understand what data you need to do a needs and resource assessment. The second tool here is called a resource assessment tool. This is the tool you're going to use just to catalog all of the other resources you have available. And so there's two ways you could do this, depending on your time. You could first wait for that full needs assessment to be completed, take the priority areas, and then figure out who else in your community, district or sub-district, are doing things to target that prioritized area. Or you could do it more generally and say what other resources out there are targeting elders with dementia. And you can have another team member go out there and figure out what resources are available. So when you do that, you're going to first look, and in each of these columns refers to a different resource that's available. And you first name it, you write where you found it, any contact information, things like that. This way, as time rolls on, if a new staff member comes on board, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Everything will be in one place and they could see it there. Who are they serving? What services do they provide? What risk and protective factors are they targeting? In this row here, that says what services do they provide enough information for a new staff member to be able to read it and say, oh yeah, I want to leverage that in the future. The last two rows are about thinking about what makes other people successful. So first, are there outcomes? Is this a successful service? Because just because there's another service out there targeting elders with dementia doesn't mean they're doing it well. So what are they doing? Are they doing it well? Are they getting outcomes? If so, what is it about what they're doing that's working? And so this is a kind of a meta question that's pretty important, but it's this notion of if they're servicing folks and they're getting great turnout and people are loving it, well, what is it about it that people are loving? Because you're going to want to borrow those things and bring it to your service. So maybe their times that they're open are great and fit wonderfully with the elders with dementia. Maybe the types of activities they're doing, maybe they offer transportation, maybe they go out to people's homes. What is it about what they're doing that's working? So think about that. And that's a really important point and a really good topic to talk about with your needs and resource assessment team, because people will be able to delineate what works about all these programs. Or maybe it's what doesn't work. Maybe we learn a lot from what doesn't work all the time. So maybe it's like, this is a great program. Unfortunately, nobody shows up for it because people can't get there because it's a rural community and there's no transportation. So that, understanding that, allows you to create a program that could be more, that could fit your population better. So if you need any support, this was a hugely fast overview to these two tools, as well as a full needs and resource assessment. If you need any support or help going through those, email me, ask me questions. Always available to help, and I could dive deeper. This was the stepping into the shallow water of a needs and resource assessment. If you want to go deeper, please invite me along and I will join you in the journey of needs and resources. Before we close, I want to go back to our PowerPoint here and talk a little bit about this question of, well, we already have a program. So for many of you listening right now, you already have a program. The PA intervention, the physical activity intervention for elders, has already been developed. So what do we do now, right? It's sort of this notion of the painter's palette. We've already chosen a program. So do we go back to step one? And the answer is yeah, you kind of do. You don't have to do it right away, but at some point you're going to want to revisit, because there may be information, there may be new needs that came out. So we did a needs assessment when we were putting the grant together for PRISM, but there may be new needs that have arisen, or perhaps when we did the grant for PRISM for the Thai context, we didn't consider some individual problem areas for your specific sub-district. And so you'll want to integrate that in. You also want to test assumptions. So as the research team put this grant together, there may be perspectives that we missed from the practitioner perspective or the family perspective. So putting that diverse group of people together allows you to test the assumptions we made and see, was our needs assessment correct? We may change focus. So we see this one a lot where traditionally people are focused on risk factors and risk factors, and they want to reduce risks. Well, sometimes when you revisit, those risks have been reduced, but what is missing is the protection to mitigate against that, the protection to protect them from the problems. And so sometimes as programs proceed, we might want to switch focus to being more strength-based and strengthen the things that work, as opposed to getting rid of the risks alone. And then going back to the resource assessment, you could always find new partnerships. This is going to be something we revisit when we talk about readiness and building interorganizational relationships. But there's always new partnerships or resources that pop up and are out there. So going back and rethinking about these things is useful. Now the caveat here is that you don't need to spend most likely 3 months doing a full needs assessment if one's already been done. But at minimum, you should convene your team and talk about it. You may want to spend time and go real deep and collect new data and do everything, or you might just want to reflect. That's up to you and what your needs are for the project. It could be done at multiple levels of specificity, but at least getting people together and talking about it is a best practice for really making sure that the following steps of GTO are aligned with what your current needs are.